one of the most haunting African American spirituals. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child was likely born out of heart-wrenching tragedy. The forcible separation of parent from child, which so often happened to families that were enslaved. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home, a long way from home. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. A long way from home. A long way from home.
Good morning. My name is Patricia Devine, and I am a member of the Worship and Music Committee. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Welcome to our virtual service with the First Parish Plymouth congregation. These services will be posted on our Facebook page and on YouTube. The first part of our service is recorded. Following the benediction, the recording will end. Then we will go into our candles of joy and concern, and this section is not recorded. Our service today is entitled Dignity and Justice for All, and is presented by our minister, Reverend Arthur Lavoie. Our technical director is Chris Lennon. We hope you stay for our virtual coffee hour after the service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever you believe, wherever you are on your journey, come walk with us this hour. Let us walk together this hour. Our call to worship this morning reflects, is written by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, but it is the presence of justice and brotherhood. Our opening hymn is number 169, We Shall Overcome.
do believe that we shall all be free someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall live in peace someday.
Good morning, the Reverend Arthur Lavoie. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm delighted to be with you this morning, and I invite you to speak with me the words of our chalice lighting that are on your screen. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, to speak the truth in love, and to help one another.
I wonder what any of you would tell me about Martin Luther King Jr. and what some of his favorite quotes were. In the emails families got this morning, we talked about one of his famous quotes. It's the one most of us think of first. I have a dream. 58 years ago, in August of 1963, King gave this speech where he stated, I have a dream that one day the nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day in the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, the state sweltering with heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. These words were 58 years ago. I have a dream today. You may not know this, but there's a story that King told a lot. It is the story of Rip Van Winkle, who was a man who slept for 20 years. Can you imagine sleeping 20 years? But Dr. King's point was that many white people in the US were asleep to the injustices and the unfairness the Black people had to deal with all the time. I invite us each right now on this Sunday morning in our warm houses to say, wake up out loud. Wake up. Again, wake up. Again, wake up. Well, a new set of leaders from the marginalized communities are sending the same message. Wake up. Many of the injustices, much of the unfairness is still here. And there are some new injustices. Wake up. And many people who have not been paying attention, who have been asleep, are waking up. Perhaps you may want to talk with your loved ones your families, your friends, about a time they realized that they needed to wake up to injustices, to struggles? What was it like for them to realize they needed to wake up? Perhaps today, this week, many of us will say, wake up. So before we continue our service, let's say it out loud one more time. Wake up.
Our reading this morning it's an excerpt from the book So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. It is very hard to survive as a woman of color in this world. And I remember saying once that if I stopped to feel, really feel, the pain of the racism I encountered, I would start screaming and I would never stop. So I did what most of us do. I tried to make the best of it. I worked 50% harder than my white coworkers. I stayed late every day. I dressed like every day was a job interview. I was over polite to white people whom I had encountered in public. I bent over backwards to prove that I was not angry, that I was not a threat. I laughed off those racist jokes as if I didn't feel the sting. I told myself that it would all be worth it one day, that being a successful Black woman was revolution enough. But as I got older, as the successes I had reached for slowly became a reality, something inside me began to shift. I would try to make my voice quieter in meetings, but I couldn't. I would try to laugh off racist jokes, but I couldn't. I would try to accept my boss's reasons for why I could have a promotion, but could not have my raise. And I couldn't. And I started talking. I started to question, I started to resist, and I started to demand. I wanted to know why it was considered a bad thing that I was opinionated. I wanted to know what exactly it was about my hair that was unprofessional. I wanted to know what exactly it was about that joke that people found funny. And once I started talking, I couldn't stop.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let oppression turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let oppression turn me round. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let segregation turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let segregation turn me round. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let injustice turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let injustice marching up to freedom land.
You all set, Art?
I'm all set.
Good.
I'm not on screen.
You're not?
Nope.
Hold
The
on.
the chalice
You
is.
are on mine, Art. You were.
Oh, I am? I'm not on my screen. The chalice was on my screen. Maybe I need to start talking and all of a sudden I'll appear. All right. I don't know why let me just look at my computer. If I got a setting incorrect, I don't know.
It took me a minute on my monitor for you to come up. Are you still not up on your screen?
I'm not up on my screen now.
Let me check my setting.
If I put gallery view, okay, I know I need to have speaker view. All right, I'm there now.
Okay.
Don't know what happened. Okay. Thank you, Sandy and Jean and Scott. That was a beautiful rendition of Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. 65 years ago, a little more than that, on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks left the Montgomery Fair department store late in the afternoon for her regular bus ride home. All 36 seats of the bus she boarded were soon filled, with 22 blacks seated from the rear and 14 whites from the front. Driver J.P. Blake, seeing a white man standing in the front of the bus, called out for the 4 passengers in the row just behind the whites to stand up and move to the back. Nothing happened. You better make it light on yourselves and let me have those seats, the driver said. At this, 3 of them moved to stand in the back of the bus, but Rosa Parks responded that she was not in the white section and didn't think she ought to move. When Parks refused again, the bus driver advised her that the law gave him emergency police power to enforce the segregation codes and that he would arrest her if he needed to. Just imagine for a moment how twisted things get when bus drivers are, in fact, deputized and have emergency police power to arrest people. Parks replied that he should do what he had to do. She was not moving. Blake notified Parks that she was officially under arrest. She should not move until he returned with the Montgomery police. At the station, officers booked, fingerprinted, and incarcerated Rosa Parks. It was not possible for her to think lightly of being arrested, having crossed the line in polite society, and I'm using the language of that day, having crossed the line that divided Negroes from niggers, she had reason to expect not only stinging disgrace among her own people, but the least civilized attentions of the whites. And all of this information is found in Parting the Waters, America in the King Years by Taylor Branch. The Black leadership in Montgomery and their white allies had been looking for a case they might use to break the segregation laws. Rosa Parks was not the first person to refuse to give up her seat on the bus, but the other two women who had recently done so did not have the impeccable personal and family credentials that would have stood up to public scrutiny. After bailing Rosa out of jail, they asked her if she would be willing to fight this case in court and be the person the community could rally around in a bus boycott in Montgomery. This proposal greatly upset her family. According to Taylor Branch, Raymond Parks, her husband, came nearly undone, having just felt primitive helplessness and helpless terror when his wife had been snatched into jail. He could not bear the thought that she would re-enter that forbidden zone by choice. Now there was hope that the arrest could be forgiven as an isolated incident, but if she persisted, it would be deliberate. It would be political. The white folks will kill you, Rosa, he said, pleading with her not to do it. There was much at stake. This was not an easy or safe choice, but the time was right, and many African Americans in Montgomery were angry at years of humiliation and degradation. They were ready to take risks. And so the Montgomery bus boycott was born. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose birth we celebrate this weekend, was chosen as its chair almost by accident. He was a young minister. He was new to Montgomery. He was a virtual unknown. His chief asset, according to Taylor Branch, was his lack of debts or enemies in the Black ministerial community. As we all know, he was the right person for that role, and he rose to the occasion. He honed his oratory skills, spoke eloquently to the needs and oppression of his people, and courageously led the civil rights movement in our country. Langston Hughes wrote, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?" Can you see Langston Hughes' words in Rosa Parks' story? Do you see his words in the story from Ijeoma Oluo from our reading this morning in the current can you see his poem in the Black Lives Matter movement currently happening in our country? All are filled with dreams deferred, aren't they? All are filled with the festered sore and the heavy load of discrimination and oppression, the hallmarks of our patriarchal white supremacist society. Now, let me ask you more troubling questions. Do you see any of Langston Hughes' poem in the hearts and minds of those people who attacked the Capitol a week and a half ago, and who threatened to perpetrate more violence? Are there deferred dreams and festering sores in the more conservative and racist white community that has now exploded in our lives? I'm in no way defending them or the violence they perpetrate. Let me make that abundantly clear. But I do want to understand what's going on. Without understanding what is happening at all levels of our society, we will only drive that hatred and violence underground, and it will emerge over and over again. It will explode over and over again until we deal with it at its roots. So this sermon will offer a little bit of thought and analysis, not as anything definitive, but hopefully as a way to spark your own deeper thinking. I also want to say that these are difficult issues to talk about. And I in no way want to make any of us feel guilty about things that have happened in our lives, perhaps stuff we've done or thought about other people, especially people of color. As I often say, as Unitarian Universalists, it's our responsibility to let go of guilt and to take on responsibility, to use that energy, to motivate any of that energy into responsible action. In last week's sermon, there was a reading from George Tinker in which he said that we all live in a made-up world. We use our minds, our imaginations to give meaning to everything that happens in our lives. How we define and give meaning to our experiences is based on our notions about who we are, where we come from, and how our world is structured. We don't often analyze the kind of thinking we have created for ourselves. We take it as factual because it fits into our worldview. But this worldview is heavily influenced by forces of race and class and culture and gender that dwell well below the surface of our knowledge and understanding. For example, when I was growing up in Ludlow, Massachusetts, a very white town at that point, we had stereotypes and derogatory names for all of the ethnic minorities in town. The descendants of the original Yankee settlers were Protestant, so they were all going to hell, and we thought of them that way. As good Catholics, we were told not to associate with them. And then there were lots of Polish, Irish, Italian, French Canadian, and Portuguese people in town. Portuguese. That was the name used for Portuguese immigrants. And even though in my family we were half Portuguese, we thought of ourselves as Americans and not at all like these more recent Portuguese immigrants. African Americans and Puerto Ricans lived in parts of Springfield, the neighboring city, and we never went to those neighborhoods. We were taught to be afraid of those with dark skin and the horrible way they lived their lives and the horrible things they would supposedly do to us if we ventured there. That's how crazy this internalized culture of white supremacy is and how deeply rooted it becomes in all of us. So much so that we don't even realize how much of what we think about other people is completely imagined and made up. And following this dominant script is the price we pay, or the price our families have paid for being accepted in mainstream society. When we see people in our lives and our world, we are seeing them through the lens of the ideas we have created about them. Darren Wilson, the Missouri police officer who killed Michael Brown, told the jury that he shot Brown because he looked like a demon. What is it about the white imagination and not only Darren Wilson's, that he and we have been taught to see a demon when we look at a Black man. Adrienne Marie Brown in Emergent Strategies writes, "We are in an imagination battle. Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Renisha McBride and so many others are dead because in some white imagination they were dangerous. And that imagination is so respected that those who kill based on an imagined radicalized fear of Black people are rarely held accountable. We are trapped, all of us, by other people's thinking about us based on superficial factors, and we are all trapped by the ways that we have been taught to think of ourselves and others. Even as a minister, I find that many people have ideas about what that means that have nothing to do with me. Depending on their own background, upbringing, and experiences, they might see me as a good and supportive person or a demon that tries to enforce a system of beliefs on others. And then add the level of being a queer minister to that, and boy, I get all kinds of feedback. This might help explain why there was such a small police presence at the Capitol to deal with an armed group of angry and volatile, mostly white men. If this had been an unarmed group of Black Lives Matter protesters, the Capitol would have been surrounded by armed police decked out in full riot gear. Unarmed people of color are seen as more of a threat than armed white terrorists and insurgents. In our collective imagination, we tend not to remember that all or nearly all of the mass killings and terrorist attacks in this country have been carried out by white men. Our collective forgetfulness, our collective racism, sexism, homophobia, and all the other ways we dehumanize people is shameful. We stand once again at the threshold of great new beginnings for our lives, our nation, and our world. We've been able to create vaccines to deal with the coronavirus, even though we're not yet sure how long they will be effective. We will soon be able to emerge a bit from the bunkers of our fear and isolation. On Wednesday, as we inaugurate Joseph Biden, a new president, we enter a new chapter in our country's history. With the inauguration of Kamala Harris, a Black woman of mixed racial heritage, as our vice president, there is much hope for the future. Yet there is also much racism and sexism and much fear of the change that this new administration represents. It is a joyful time, and it is a dangerous time. The forces of racism and sexism that are deeply embedded in our culture are fueling the kind of violence that we saw at the Capitol. The winds of change are in the air. The time is up when we will have, the time is up to us that we will have a more egalitarian society, when the culture of white dominance and supremacy will have to give way to one where we will have to change the ideas about each other that have been deeply embedded in our collective imaginations. And that is too uncomfortable and frightening for many to consider. As with Rosa Parks, there is much at stake today. It is not an easy and safe choice to stand up for freedom and dignity and justice for all. When we stand up for the rights of others, it is sometimes looked upon as a betrayal by other members of our families and communities. And we have so much to worry about at home that it's sometimes overwhelming to think about people outside of our own circle of family, friends, and coworkers. But our silence only reinforces the current oppressive system. In spite of our anxiety, it is important that we commit ourselves at this new beginning to uphold the legacy that Dr. King spoke of, and make freedom and dignity and justice for all part of our own lives and part of our spiritual practice. Human rights begins at home in each of our hearts. How do we begin? First, I'd suggest that we find the courage to look within and just recognize without fear or guilt the prejudices about race and class and gender, age, ability, sexual identity, and orientation that we have been raised with. We all have those internal messages that affect the ways we think and act if we do not consciously fight against them. If we can take this first step, then we can truly begin to build a land that we dream of with dignity and justice for each and every one of us. Amen, and blessed be. I invite you to join now in singing the hymn. It's number 149 in our hymnal, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And it has also become known as the African American National Anthem. So please join Sandy and all of us in singing this morning.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleams of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou hast by thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places of God where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Our benediction this morning, I paraphrased a few of the words in this piece, but it's mostly from an essay called Remembering the Future by the Reverend Teresa Soto. Can we develop the skill of imagining, of remembering the future? Can we commit to build the community that will extend into a time that we only know by imagination because it will outlast us? Let us memorize, let us imagine the compass points of the day yet to come, the truth, the love, the fire, the endless yes of the horizon. Shape the scales from your imagination, reach, stretch, rise. There is no more time for pretending that everything can be all right without your care and without your attention. Amen.
Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here. My Lord calls me